okay?
If everybody's okay with it, I think we have everybody who needs to be here.
So you want me to just go?
You can do an intro, perhaps. I mean, I think everybody knows you. You're like a superstar, so.
Well, I've just got to know your newer board members a little bit, but I was very pleased to see some of your staff with whom we have worked in the past. But Terry asked me to come here today to really give an overview of what all's involved in a superintendent search, so people kind of know what you're in for. So first, I will say that we, and by statute, when you have an appointed superintendent, the single most important decision you'll ever make as a school board member is who your superintendent will be. The superintendent, by law, whether they're elected or appointed, has certain statutory responsibilities. The board has certain statutory responsibilities. And when you're in the position that the board gets to appoint the superintendent, that puts the board in the position of selecting the single most important education leader and administrative leader in the district. So we see this as a crucially important decision, not just for the board, but for your community, both internal and external to the school district. I will say that, as you can see from this chart right here, in Florida, we have some elected and some appointed superintendents. If you're new to the board, you may not be aware, but there are only 2 states that have appointed superintendents. All the rest are elected. But in Florida, there are 29 appointed superintendents, okay? Of those 29, I want to point out that since 18 of the 29 have been newly appointed since 2020. So the new crop of superintendents, the new leadership in the state, you can see with the yellow circles up there, is dominant across the state. We have a youthful, in their tenure, superintendency across the state of Florida. And then, what I'm going to add on to the top of that is you see the yellow stars there. What's that?
I see it's the I-4 corridor too.
Yeah, exactly. You see the yellow stars there, and those are the current or likely openings in 2023. And you'll notice we have Collier, we have Charlotte, we have Sarasota, we have Lee just got hired. Let me just make sure I'm looking at all these correctly here. Yeah, Collier, Charlotte, Sarasota, Osceola, you guys, Brevard, and very likely, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and Broward, we're not quite sure how that's going to end up. So it could possibly be 7 right now at the same time. And you're all looking for superintendents at the same time. Now, what I will say to you is that someone who's interested, for example, in Brevard might not be interested in Osceola. You guys have a different student population, you have different communities, that sort of stuff. But because you guys are uniquely situated in the middle of the state here, it's possible that people who apply to you would apply to some of those other districts. I say that because Julius and I had a conversation just before the meeting started, about my recommendation is, as you're moving through this process, you want to keep the pool of candidates as large as you can, as long as you can. Because as you move through the process, people will be dropping out because they will be getting other offers. It's not just in Florida that there are superintendent openings, but I will say this, there are superintendents from other states who want to come to Florida, and so you'll get some out-of-state applicants. I don't want you to be surprised if you get some out-of-state applicants who probably don't meet whatever criteria you all decide. We see consistently in every superintendent search that we do, somebody from, I don't know, pick a state, Connecticut, who's taught science for 2 years will apply and say they want to be superintendent. And you go, really? But they do, so there are a large number of applicants, but that doesn't mean they'll all be qualified based on the qualifications that you all will decide on. But it is a very competitive, and Manatee up there, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention Manatee. They too are looking for a superintendent. So you've got a lot of competition in attracting who you want, and the people who are applying have some choices, and as I was also explaining to Julius, some of the people who we would normally expect to apply are kind of going to give things a year or two to settle down from the education conversation that's happening nationally. Just to have some things dialed down because, as you know, you guys have been on the campaign trail or up at the dais, and things have been pretty heated in the education world in the last year and a half. And for some people, that's a bit of a risk to step into a different position right now with that much focus on them. So there are people we know across this state specifically who have applied before or are ready, waiting to apply, but they're like, you know what, I'm going to give it another year. I'm going to give it a year and a half. So that is just the context within which you're going to be looking for a superintendent. I like to remind boards that Superman and Superwoman does not exist, that there is no perfect candidate. So what'll happen is you'll find one candidate who you're like, wow, this person is really great in curriculum. They didn't do anything with finance. Or this person's really great with finance, hasn't done anything with curriculum. So it's very rare that you're going to have that unicorn that fits everything you're looking for. So you want to kind of recognize that you're going to have to give up something to get something. And the superintendent's most important task is to manage their team who comprises all the other skill sets that they may not have had experience in. That doesn't mean they weren't exposed to it. You all will determine what the qualifications are. Some districts, when they advertise, say that the applicants need to have had, let's just say, 5 years of executive leadership experience in order to be qualified. But then you have to break it down. Do you all believe that executive administrative experience is the principal level or district level? Or could it be either? So there's some further delineations and further conversations that the board will have to decide, what those qualifications are. But I do like to start by reminding people Superman, Superwoman does not exist. I will say when you're doing a superintendent search, there are some things that are non-negotiables. And those things are consistent throughout the process from day one until the day you select the superintendent. First and foremost is the Sunshine Law. Everything that happens related to your superintendent search has to be advertised and is open to the public. Second is public records. All have to be maintained. That's another problem for Florida superintendent searches. If there are superintendents from other states who are interested in applying, when they apply in other states, their names are hidden until they make the final interview. So they can apply, not even get an interview, and it's no harm, no foul for them. But for them to apply in Florida, because of our public records, it's immediately public. So we try to tell people when we're working with school districts, when you post the advertisement, we make sure and put some language in there that talks about the Florida Sunshine Law, which is very different from other states' sunshine laws, because people will apply. As soon as they apply, their name sometimes will hit the local paper. You guys have the Orlando Sentinel that covers you, right?
Yeah, the News Gazette.
Okay, the Gazette.
The Sentinel sometimes covers.
Either way, it'll come up in the paper, and then it gets home to wherever they are, in Kentucky or Connecticut or wherever, and then their board hears about it. And when their board hears about it, if they hadn't told their board, it's a real problem for the person, so then sometimes they withdraw, or they just never even apply because it's too much of a risk along the way. But the public records exist in Florida, and we operate underneath them, so that's just one of the pieces to the search that I need to make you aware of. And the third is public input. The schools in your community are public schools because they belong to the public, they belong to the community. And so having their input and having them be a part of the process in one or more ways is important for them to continue to support the district in ways that I know you all want to see the community continue to invest in their schools. So public input is going to be an important part of your search. You guys will get to decide what, how often, how it looks, all of that. Before the search, typically, boards will have to decide who they want to work with. Now, FSBA is one group you can work with, but there are other consultants that are out there. So you may want to look at who you want to work with and have that conversation. I say that because when you add a superintendent search to staff's plate, they already have their full-time jobs, and they don't have experience in executive hiring. So there are some pieces to the superintendent search with which they are unfamiliar, and it also puts them in an awkward position because they're then running the search and handling things for the person that they may later report to. So the more you can kind of keep staff protected over here, that's not to say they're not involved, it's just, we strongly recommend that you have some professionals help you with this, whether it's us or somebody else. The other thing you're going to want to do is have what we call your pre-search review, and that is really taking a assessment by the current seated board of where we are. Where are we on our strategic plan? Where are we with our business community? Where are we with our unions? Where are we with our community? Where are we with the legislative delegation? You know, so that there's consensus of where you are, so that when you hire somebody, you all have a common agreement, this is the status of the district. And that particular meeting, when we work with you, we strongly recommend it be in your boardroom, it gets recorded, and then anyone who calls us and says, hey, I'm interested in applying for Osceola, you know, we say, watch that meeting. Because you'll see the interactions that the board makes with each other. You'll hear the whole lowdown of the status of the finances, of if you have a referendum, you know, all of the pertinent information that somebody's going to want to decide if they want to come here will be discussed at that particular meeting.
This is like a state of Osceola County schools with the different stakeholders.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
We have a very targeted agenda that we run through if you work with us, that really takes in, and we try to do it in an hour and a half. Top things, give us your top five. We give you the agenda in advance, so each of you can prepare to bring your priorities in this area, and then we just have a conversation.
And this is a meeting where we can obviously have the top folks. For example, we would have we can have the union come in, for example, and give you their information. We can also have Sarah, our finance CFO, for example. So this is not just the board having this conversation. Can we actually have other stakeholders in
You
the
could,
room?
you absolutely could, but we want to make sure the board has agreement.
Okay.
If a staff member says this is the status and board doesn't agree with that status, how would we know?
Okay, understood. However, some of that information is just, it's
Factual.
just data.
Right?
This is just data. This is our budget, for example. So I guess we would look at the agenda and then we can determine.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
Okay.
But I do want to include them in though, so just to let you know, at some point, I think it's good to have a cross-section in this process. I agree with you.
The next topic is community input, and we absolutely look at staff, parents, business owners, retirees, all the different aspects of your community as people that need to have some kind of input, and you guys will decide what that looks like. Many times you'll start with an electronic survey. Many times you'll have regional input sessions. I'm trying to think of what we call them, targeted focus groups. Students, you'd want to include students, teachers, however you want to work it out. You know, you come up with the list of the groups that you want to have meet, or you can just advertise them open, anyone's welcome, and you do it in maybe, 3, 4, 5, however many major communities. You'd have Poinciana, you'd have Kissimmee, you'd have, all the different areas. And they might meet in the cafeteria one night, and we would walk them through a protocol so that we get the same input at each one. We pull all the input together, and then we bring it to you so you understand what the community is saying they're looking for as far as qualifications and qualities, and what are their top priorities in the school district. So that's a piece of the community input, but there's more along the way. You would have different events open throughout the search where you would invite the community in, especially at the end when you're interviewing. You want the community to come in and meet your finalists. You might even have them submit some questions before you do your interviews, or sometimes we didn't used to do this. Who was around? Well, I guess I'm talking to Dana and Tanya. But when we did the last superintendent search for you guys, we didn't do what we call our Facebook Live meet and greet, but throughout the day, when you're interviewing your finalists, we have like a survey open. And so the community can watch the interviews and submit questions for the finalists. And then we do like a Facebook Live piece where the finalist comes in. I typically am the moderator. I have the questions that got submitted throughout the day. I look for common themes. I see this particular candidate, there was a bunch of themes about whatever. People did some research online and they want to know more about whatever, so I'll ask the question. We do about a 10-minute live. Our goal when you work with us is to try to have the board see each of the applicants in as many different types of situations so that you'll know how they will be live on camera, in a formal interview, in a one-on-one interview, with a community group, in a written response, all of that. Because you need to be able to assess all of that to make this important decision. Some decisions that are going to be really important for you guys to start thinking about sooner rather than later is, do you want any overlap with your current superintendent for training or just
Transition.
And then also, what is your timeline? Do you have to have somebody in place by July 1? Could it be August 1? What is your timeline? What are you working around? Are you working around graduations? Are you working around spring break? Do you want to say, forget graduations and spring break, we'll do things in the middle? Do you want to get through the summer? You're going to have to think about what your timeline is, because everything will stem from your timeline. And once you set your timeline, the most important dates are the deadline to submit applications and then the interview dates. Because when people apply, your interview dates have to be set, cleared off on your calendar so that you all are there the whole time, however many days it takes, 2, sometimes 3, depending on how many finalists you have. And the applicants, when they apply, they see those dates, they mark them off on their calendar and protect them. If you change that, then people may not be able to make, and you'll lose applicants because you change an interview date. So once you set those in, we lock them in. Some things may change. If you're going to have, for example, a community input session and there's a hurricane and it has to be canceled, then you reschedule. So there are some things that can be rescheduled in a timeline, but some things are going to be pretty locked once you decide, drop dead date, we got to have somebody hired here, and then you work backwards. If they have to be hired, if they want to have to start here, here's the overlap, they start here, we have to have the contract on the agenda here, which means we have to have negotiations here, which means we have to have the discussion to hire them here, which means the interviews have to be here, and you just keep backing up from there.
Yeah, and I think it's a good rule of thumb. I mean, just what you think, your opinion too, because I value it as well, is I'm thinking the beginning of the school year, that person needs to be in place. You know what I mean? So whether that's like a week before to get them ready, but when you start the brand-new school year, I think she submitted it for the end of the summer.
Yeah,
right?
but I'm talking about that now, but I disagree. It has to be like June, because
No,
all
I'm
the
talking
summer's
about the
planning.
latest. I'm about the furthest back.
I feel like the furthest back is
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
summer.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the
But we'll
point,
talk about that.
the point is that, though, is that, but skin is, we have to have it by then, is what I'm
Sure.
saying. So, I mean, we'd like to have it earlier, yes, I'm willing to do that, but I'm just saying that, yes. I'm just thinking, there's no way we should, I mean, not no way, something's happened, but, it would be not a good start for somebody to start the school
Well,
year.
ideally, you want to give them as
Transition
much time as you can to do those things. I will tell you, superintendents have started all throughout the year. We've
Right,
we've
so
had
it's
them
not
start January to
unprecedented, yeah.
December, depending on the needs of a district, because things happen.
Right.
Sometimes people
However,
get hires, whatever.
you do bring up an interesting point, which is, I think that we hired the best person and that may take us longer. So one of the things that we might have for discussion is, can we have an interim person while we continue the search for the best candidate? So that might be something also that we would need to decide, and I'm sure you can.
Yeah,
help
that
us
would
with
be something you would want to decide. And actually, the first question that I like to ask boards is, and this is true, I'm not being funny or facetious when I say this, but if there is somebody internal on your staff and everybody thinks that that's the person who needs to be our next superintendent, you don't even have to do a search. You can hire the person, you can name them to be your superintendent and start with a transition. I don't know that that exists, I don't know that it doesn't, but I put that in your ear to think about, because if you have that situation, and we've seen it in other districts, then don't put your community through a bunch of turmoil and confusion and staff's uncertainty. Some districts intentionally direct their superintendent to build a bench. And some districts know that this is the next person, or these two, or whatever. And so if that's the case, you may want to have a conversation around that. Because that might be I don't know. I know nothing about what you guys got going on here today related to this, but I just put that in your ear. So let me talk a little bit about the steps in the search. That it doesn't matter who you work with, but you're going to have the same steps in the search. And I'll go through all of these individually. Those are kind of small. But you start with the timeline, which I've already discussed. When we talk about the scope of a search, there's this strange conversation that some people say, well, we have to do a national search, right? We have to do a national search. Any search that you do, if you do a search, is going to be a national search because of the internet. That's just how it works. You'll decide where you want to advertise. Very likely, if you are going to do a search, you'll want to advertise in top jobs for education, Education Week, some of the key places that we know people who are looking for jobs look to. There's an Association for Hispanic Administrators and ALIS and there's some different groups, and those are some places to consider advertising. But it will be a national search if you do a search. The only time it wouldn't be a national search is, like I said, if you had an internal person that you were just going to promote. You will want to include some kind of input. And like I said, input can be in the form of surveys, forums, targeted focus groups. It can be in the form of community advisory committee meetings, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. It can be throughout different touch points along the way, any number of input all along the way, more than you'll ever probably need. But it's important to have some of that input before you advertise so you know what your community wants, and you all come together and go, well, look what, did you see this? I think we ought to consider this as part of what we're looking for, if there's a piece that comes to you through some of that input gathering process. You can, some districts do, some districts don't, have what's called a community advisory committee. I will tell you, you guys are Osceola, right next door in Polk, when we did their superintendent search. Their community advisory committee's job was to screen the applications. So they had all of the applications, which were 52 at that time. And the committee's job, each board member got to appoint, I think, 2 or 3, and they had some other community people on it. They took all of the 50 whatever applications, and they looked at what did the board say they were looking for, and they brought to the board, here are I think they had 7 that are qualified that we think you ought to continue to consider. One thing I tell people about a community advisory committee is the community advisory committee is an advisory group, which means they give you advice. You do not have to accept their advice. There's risks to not accepting their advice. However, you cannot absolve yourselves of the responsibility to make the decision. The decision lies with the board statutorily. So they advise. That's what Polk did when Orange County recently had a community advisory committee, and that community advisory committee created the community survey. That was what they wanted them to do.
Yeah, very
So
specific.
it just depends on what you're interested in and what you want your community to do. They can do all kinds of different things. In Pinellas, they didn't have a community advisory committee at all. They were, it was prior to elections, and their board meetings had gotten really, really long with community input, and they were concerned that if they had one group represented but not another, or somehow they just couldn't possibly include everybody in the community advisory, so they said, we'll do the input, but not the advisory at this time, and that's what they did. So you can have it, you don't have to have it, and they can play different roles. You're also going to have to come to agreement as a board what qualities and qualifications you're looking for. And qualities are some of the maybe documentable type things, communication skills or ability to pass a referendum. Maybe you guys are coming up with a referendum, or it might even be works with different types of communities, has experience.
Actually,
I don't know,
I have
some
a
people
que-
might say internationally.
I have a question for you on this topic, actually, because this is something that was kind of on my mind, and and I value your opinion because I know you've been in this for a while. A lot of times I hear people immediately when they talk about qualifications, they only want to talk to people that have only been in that same population group, like number of students. Like say, for instance, if we're 60,000 students, right? It's like they put that, like an overemphasis on that. I'm only going to talk to people that have only worked with 60,000 students. And so I was just wondering, on your experience of other people, how many times have superintendents been good fits that may not have just been in that population group? They might have been 3 million students, they might have been only 20.
Yeah.
But they meet all your other qualifications you want, they just may have only been with 20. Like, how
That's-
important is it to?
Yeah, that's one of those
The student
things-
population's always referenced all the time.
Remember when I said there's no Superman or Superwoman, you have to give some things up to get others?
Right.
That's one of those things that the board has a discussion about. And the board says, you know what, gosh, I really like this candidate, even though they don't have, they've only been in a district with 12,000 students. I will tell you this, we've had, in Escambia County, they brought in a sitting superintendent from another state who was one of their finalists. And Escambia has 70, 90,000, I mean, no, they're not up to 90. I think they're about 70,000 students. So it's a pretty large district. This guy was from, I want to say a 16,000 student district. But they liked everything else that they saw. He had been superintendent of the year in his state. He was interested, so they brought him in. He interviewed, and when he left after the final interview, he would have gotten that job. I know the board, I know he would have gotten that job. He called back later and said he withdrew from consideration because at the time, the retiring superintendent, I don't know if any of you ever met Malcolm Thomas, but he had been, I think, a three-time elected superintendent, former school district administrator. He was a really good superintendent. But the superintendent coming from the other state said, I'm looking for more of a challenge. The district has too much in place that's going good, and I don't want to make a lateral, my district's going good. Why would I go from a district that's running smooth to another district running smooth? I really want more of a challenge. And he backed out. But they would have offered him the job, I know they would have, based on conversations I had with that board. And his size district ended up not being as important as they thought originally when they were having the conversation. So it just depends. It depends on the package. You may, for example, in a qualification, you might say,
But have you seen people struggle, though? Like for instance, if you're playing in high school football and you go to the pros, they're bigger, faster, stronger, you know what I mean? But have you seen
I will
people
say
get
I've
promoted
not
to that position
seen-
in your past and see them like, man, they just couldn't handle the new challenges of a.
I haven't seen boards hire somebody that would have been in a struggle.
I do have 2 questions about qualifications, and that also ties into the interview process, so I don't know if you have like a separate.
I do.
Okay, so I'll hold for that, but with regards to qualifications, I know when we are in like committees to like, find a firm or something, one of the things that I've seen done, and that I've done myself, is a weighted category. So for example, if the board decides the most important thing is, I'm just using your example, that they have come from a district just like ours, population-wise, right? That is top, so we weigh it that way. I mean, is that one option to sort of even the feel for that person?
Anything's an option that the board decides they want to do, and if the board wants to prioritize the size of the district, the board can prioritize the
Or
size
not,
of the district.
or
Exactly.
not, like, cool, that's 2 points.
I would
versus,
say, some things based on the input that you'll get, you'll see how important that may be to your community. It may or may not be, right? And you guys will have conversation to decide, well, she doesn't think it's important and she doesn't, but the rest of you do, so you'll have conversation about that. You might say, experience in a district, how many students you guys have now? 65?
67.
What's that?
69.
67% Latino.
69,
Okay,
yeah.
69. So you might say experience in leadership in a school district of more than 40,000 students. You give yourself some space, and you might say preferred. You don't even
Preferred
have to
is an
say
option.
required, you could say preferred. I will say, to answer your question most specifically, in,
I thought you were talking about percentage of the demographic. Yeah, we had like something 60-some% Hispanic. That was.
oh, I see what you're
Yeah,
saying.
so I thought you meant
We
to
have
say
a lot of
like.
yeah, like I
Like we
feel
have a minority, high
more
minority
than-
population.
Yeah.
Population, I think it's like our demographic is important to me.
Well, but is it important for the person to be of that demographic, or is it important for that person to have worked with that
Yeah,
demographic?
work, yeah.
Yeah. And it's
in
not-
in a demonstrably positive and successful way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can say preferred, you can say desired, you can say required. So you would probably say, for example, master's degree required, doctorate preferred.
Yeah.
Or you could say doctorate required. One thing that boards need to have a conversation about is, and you'll get some input from your community on this issue, does your superintendent have to have had experience being a principal? And if you say yes to that, then you're excluding people from alternate leadership paths, military, business, things like that, because they will not have had principal experience. They may have had management experience that might be comparable, so the board has to discuss how important is that. There are some districts who want someone who's been a principal because they know that the principals all will be reporting to this person, and they believe that the education leader has to have had education principal experience. But we've had other boards that were willing to look at military, business, other types of candidates. So that's something that the board's going to need to have a conversation about. Another thing you're going to have to talk about is compensation, and it's the conversation nobody ever wants to have. But remember the slide I showed you related to the state of Florida and the competition and the current climate that people, the risk to their own professional careers to do this. So the compensation packages are pushing up in ways that you just need to be prepared for. And by the time you hire, I don't know what that will be. What we have and what we share with you is the current compensation of appointed superintendents in Florida. But then as new ones get hired while you're doing your search and they start to hire, that will continue to push up that number. And we look at compensation as an entire package, not just salary. There are some people who might have younger children, and they might need the compensation in the form of salary because they have kids and they're saving for college or whatever. But you might also have other people whose kids are out of the house and they may want deferred compensation, or they may want some other kind of compensation.
Bonus structure
whatever
or
it might be.
something.
So it's a package. Typically, your superintendent would have the same insurance, that you offer other people, but it is an executive position. And in your community, it's usually the executive position of the largest employer. And I like to remind people, you're running a transportation service with the buses, a landscape service with the landscape people, a restaurant, a string of restaurants because of food service, an inventory company, and that's without even talking about education. So it's a big job, and executive compensation is something people don't want to talk about, but you got to be prepared for. You also want to talk about vetting, and we'll get to the interviews in just a minute. So some boards like to have a community committee do some of that vetting, to look at all the applicants and say, these are the ones we think are qualified and you ought to continue to look at. But in addition to that, I will tell you that you all will get bombarded with information about every applicant, good and bad. Because anyone who's ever served in a leadership position has had to make some people unhappy along the way. And so you will get, I remember there was a gentleman who applied from North Carolina and was a finalist in one of the school districts in Florida. And I don't know what he had done, but somehow that community made it their mission to just blast the board members about things that they didn't like. It will happen. You will not get an applicant who doesn't have some criticism. You'll also, every single person will have, especially with blogs now, it's not just factual reporting like newspaper used to be. And so when you Google people's names, you will find negative stuff on every single applicant. You just need to prepare yourselves for that. Some of it may be true, some of it may not be true. That's why you need to kind of work through the process. Depending on who you work with, I know we do background searches, and we do a full background search to the degree that we can. The deepest background search can only occur from your HR department once there's an offer of employment on the table. But if we see something that, I call it a hit, if we see something that has a hit on it from somebody, The first thing we do is ask the person. So, for example, I had an applicant out of Pinellas County, and when we got his search back, it had like 18 traffic tickets. And I'm thinking, I've had a traffic ticket, I can't judge that, but 18, so, and when I looked into it, there was about 5 of them that were failure to maintain auto insurance. And I'm like, you want to be the superintendent of a school district and you're not maintaining your auto insurance? This is bizarre to me. Something's not right? So I called them and said, can you help me? Can you explain to me, what the pattern here? Because if it happened once, but 5 times, I can't bring that to a board and say, here's a good idea, So he said, nope, that's what happened.
My wife handles the insurance.
Pardon? Yeah, no, he didn't say that. He said, nope, that's what happened. And so typically, when somebody does that, and I say, okay, just understand, if we move your application forward, the press is going to get it. This will be in the newspaper. I just need you to be prepared for that. He said, yep, I'm all in. Okay. Well, the minute it hit the paper, he withdrew. But we gave him the chance. He chose not to take it. So remember when I said keep the pool open as long as you can, as wide as you can? There will be people along the way who drop out for any number of reasons, some of which might be a background. We had another person whose background hit, and it said a home foreclosure. It was a home foreclosure. So we just wanted to know some more details about it. Sometimes that happens with a divorce. There's things that could explain it. Well, when we dug into it, it wasn't him that had the home foreclosure. He sold the house to people. They never paid appropriately, so the house foreclosed, but his name was listed on some piece of paper associated with it because he had sold the house. That's easily explainable. That I can talk about. So vetting is important to really pay attention to. And typically, like I said, if people are from Florida, they understand the scrutiny they're going to be under. If they're not from Florida, then whoever you hire to work with you needs to make it their job to make sure these people know.
Yeah.
Because it's a piece that will come out. There's nothing that will be hidden. It's just not going to be hidden. When we talk about interviews, and Terry, I hope that I hit your question, or this is the appropriate time to ask it, but typically you'll want to bring in 3 to 5 people for your finalists' interviews. We don't recommend more than 5. We don't recommend less than 3. So somewhere between 3 and 5 is usually a pretty good number. If you want to have semifinalists, you can do a semifinalist vetting cycle, and typically we would recommend that you would ask, let's say you have a community committee, which you may or may not, but let's say you do. Let's say they bring you 8 names. These are the people we think you ought to continue to consider. Then those 8 people answer, there's 5 of you, so we get 5 questions. 2 or 3 of them are video responses, 2 or 3 of them are written responses. They get them like on a Friday morning. We want them back on a Thursday night, so they get 1 weekend to do it, but it's a pretty quick turnaround. So you can then look at their responses to some questions, which will help you further vet these 8 people. And then you come back together and say, all right, based on what we saw from the semifinalists, who do we think we should bring in for face-to-face interviews? And then we would try to recommend between 3 to 5 for that.
I like that idea, by the way. Like you said, like a video, because it's on paper, it's not the same as seeing it, but you don't want to fly them all the way over here and have a formal interview, but just have them submit some kind of video input so we can kind of.
And we don't like to give them too much time because they need to get it back, and we want it to be their response, not, some curated response from a team or whatever. But, so that's a recommendation that we have. With regard to interviews, typically, we would recommend that you have a board interview. You're all up there or down here, probably up there, and the candidate is here, finalist is here. And typically, you would ask each of the finalists the same questions in the public board interview so that your community and you have comparative responses. So each of you would ask the same questions of every candidate so that like, let's say John's asking the business questions. He's got whatever business questions he wants, he's asking them of the same people, then you can compare the answers. They got the same question, there's no hint of impropriety, everyone's being treated fairly, everyone got the same questions. Then you do the one-on-one interviews, and I would argue there is nothing more important than your one-on-one interview with each of these people, because it's an opportunity for you to sit across the table with the person and visualize, can I work with this person? Is there a workable dynamic? Or is this not a workable dynamic? And I just don't know that this is somebody I can work with. And so you'll have one-on-one time as well as full board time. You may also have, like I said, a live Facebook where there's community questions that got submitted, and that's another kind of interview. You might also have, last
You
time we
say
had.
one-on-one, you mean like individually with each individual board member? Okay.
Yeah, so you would have, let's say you had 5 finalists.
Right.
You would have 45 minutes or an hour with this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. Yeah, they would rotate between each of you. It's a long day, but I promise you it's worth it. Last time, we had a big open house at,
Osceola Heritage Park.
what was it called?
Osceola Heritage Park.
Heritage Park, okay. It was a big event, I remember. It was a lot of people. You guys had probably 500 people show up that night that wanted to meet the finalists. And then after that, there's a input, like a QR code. And they put, what are,
Rank.
no, we never rank anybody. Mm-mm, no.
Yeah,
voting
like
who they
America's Got
want.
Talent or something like that.
No, the
I
question,
I had the community. They're voting.
one thing we never do is rank anyone, ever, 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 because, let me tell you why, and then I'll explain what the input we get from them.
Oh, get it.
We don't ask the board to rank, we don't ask the community, the citizens group, nobody ranks, because when you rank, you get invested in who your top choice is.
Yeah.
And your mind isn't open to all the other choices. And I will tell you, who you think you like on paper, when you meet them face to face, it shifts a little. And I need your mind to be open to keep the pool open as wide as you can, as long as you can. I want you to be open, like, yeah, I could see all 3 of these people could work for me. Let me, dive in a little more. We never rank. That's like the kiss of death. That gets you in real
Terrible to
trouble.
say we got our 6th pick,
Yeah.
Well, and then the newspaper says so-and-so's the front runner.
Front
And
runner, yeah.
it does not serve the board, the community, it does not serve anybody.
One thing, just kind of for like my board to kind of know a little bit as well, because one thing you said earlier was when we have like the public meeting, right, and like each one of them asks the same questions. Because I sit on, Congressman Soto's interview boards for the Service Academy, and we try to do that as much as possible. But there always seems to be like 1 or 2 just extra questions because
Sure.
that person may have answered a certain
Yes.
way. So I just think that as a good rule of thumb, to have, let's say there's 10 questions total, okay, 8 always be the same, but then nobody's going to judge you for like 1 or 2 extra questions because
Yeah.
they're a follow-up or they
For
said
sure.
something very unique, you know what I mean?
Or
It's
they
hard
didn't
to-
answer and you need a little follow-up. Yeah, that's a
just
great
give them a
point.
head's idea. It's
And
like, it's not
those
like 10,
ones-
that's it. That's
Great
all
Those
we're
ones,
gonna
though, I mean, each candidate is not going to know the questions ahead of time. Like, no one's going to have, so those are not recorded.
Yes, they are.
They're recorded, but they're not shown live.
Yes, they are.
So
But,
they're all somewhere then?
Yes.
Oh, okay. How are they not seeing these?
yes,
So they all
because you'll have a team working for you, and your team.
Who's gonna have them eating?
they're going to be in the little like black
In
boxes.
the green room, no. They will probably be touring your green school, and they'll be touring your technical
Okay.
school, and they'll be they'll have
So
tours to
no
go
way
see.
that they're able to see.
They will have community,
Involvement.
Field trip.
we'll have, what do we call them?
Introduction.
Community liaisons.
Oh, yeah.
Ambassadors
Like
kind of
yes,
going around
yes,
showing them.
who will pick them up at the airport and who will take them on the tour that day and who will make sure they're here at a certain time for their interview. But no, we make sure that there's no chance that they can see the other interviews. But you asked another question, the feedback from the community, the QR code. The questions are this. For finalist John Arguello, what strengths did you see? What questions do you still have?
Okay.
For finalist Erica Booth, what strengths did you see? What questions do you still have? And then that gets fed back to the board before you make your final decision, because the community, you want to know what they're thinking, and they'll say, because you go, wow, I didn't even notice that. That was a strength, or maybe there is a good question that you might want to follow up on.
I do just want to ask, will we have, if we select the Florida School Board Association, of course, will we have like a briefing on like best practices for interviewing?
Yes. You're gonna have to be prepared. I gotta go over a bunch of legal stuff with you.
Yeah, like, because I want to make
See,
sure that it's
Avoid the pitfalls, and we'll work together on that.
That's correct, yes. And typically what we do, we have like a question bank of about, oh gosh, it's might be up to 200 questions by now in different categories. And we'll work with you guys on, so like I said, in the public interview, let's say John does the business and Terry does the community, and, you know, each of you picks your own whatever categories, then like you were saying, you might have 5 questions that you know you're going to ask, but I want you to have 7 or 8 just in case there's extra time, kind of thing. So we'll go through all of that with you, but then when you do your one-on-ones, you can ask any questions you want. You can look at the whole 200 and pick whichever questions you want, or,
We can't ask every question we
no,
want.
well, our questions have been
Ask how
vetted.
old
You
you
don't
are.
want to say to
That's
the
what I
people
mean,
on
like,
this
we
board,
need
they
to-
can ask it.
You know
Bottom
what?
line is the questions they have.
Point noted.
Are vetted, they're
Yes.
safe to ask.
We also have
If you
we
go
also have,
beyond those 200, you'll know, don't go in, you know.
we also have a handout that says questions you should never ask, that has a
Yeah,
whole
the
list.
opposite, yes.
Pregnancy, children, retirement age, you know, things like that. So yes, whoever you work with will work closely, not only with your attorney, but with your HR department, your communications department, your IT department. You know, we end up having to work with all sorts of people in your staff because your clerk, your board clerk, I'm sorry, Tanya, I don't know your title these days, secretary. But
The top dog.
because she's the one preparing the agendas and she needs all the attachments, but then over here, she needs the pictures and she needs to know the events. So all the different staff members interface at different times. So let's talk about costs, because that's something you need to be aware of. There are a number of costs associated with doing a superintendent search. First is going to be your consultancy costs. Second will be your advertising. So like I said, you guys get to decide where you want to advertise. You also get to decide how long you want to advertise. I like to point out that Miami-Dade advertised for 8 days. However,
They knew who they wanted.
thank you. So if you advertise for a very short time period, the message people receive is they're not really looking. They're just checking some boxes. We recommend minimum of 4 weeks advertisement, so people can see the advertisement, think about it, prepare their materials. You've got some people who might have been watching your district. Maybe they love Osceola, we don't even know who they are. Maybe they grew up here, maybe their parents are here, or their brother lives here, and they've been waiting for the superintendency to open. They've got their materials together. But others might not, and others might go, now what is this Osceola County you speak of? And have to do a little bit of research and some due diligence.
John, point out the other danger of anointing somebody early is take a look at Palm Beach, I think it was 2 years ago. There was a deputy superintendent they anointed and said, everybody heard he was gonna have it.
Right.
Well, then the background came out that nobody ever knew about, and he was dead. And they had lost like 6 months.
Yeah, if you're gonna do a search, you need to do it with fidelity and with the true intent of searching for somebody. Because word will get out if you're not serious about doing a search, and that will deter applicants. There'll be some travel costs associated, depending on who works with you, but also for the interviews and things like that. If you decide you want to have a reception for Meet the Candidates type thing, a lot of times Ed Foundations will help with that, or chambers, or PTAs, or different groups can help to volunteer with that sometimes. Interviews typically have, like I said, costs related to hotels and meals and things like that, travel for the people. And there's typically a cost for the background, the deep dive background checks. They're, I want to say, $150 per finalist. So typically, like, we don't recommend that you do it on all 53 applications, but once it's been down to maybe 10 or something like that, and you know these are the ones you're really looking at, maybe you've given them the semifinalist questions, that's when you want to start, because just like your attorney said, sometimes things will hit that will eliminate some of the candidates, and you want to know that sooner rather than later. So those are the big costs that are involved. What are some questions that I can answer for you?
So a question I have is, how do you think the current or likely openings that are across the state, because it seems pretty, a high number right now, will affect you guys doing a search for us and affect us as well in doing the search?
It's a great question. We, at one time, did 4 searches
Okay.
at the same time. They were very congruous, partly because some districts changed from elected to appointed, so the timelines were almost identical. We have a team of 3 people. It's myself, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Bill Vogel, who actually worked in this district.
Seminole County, I think. Yeah, he was worked here for a little bit.
Yes, he was super,
He was here.
what's that?
Yes, he was here for a long time.
Yeah, he was an assistant principal, deputy soup, what was he?
He was an assistant superintendent, worked his way up.
Okay. He was then superintendent in Seminole as well as Indian River, and he was Florida Superintendent of the Year. He's very good at recruiting for us. He's always on the phone talking to somebody about what district are you interested in. So he's one of our team members. We also have a gentleman by the name of John Reichert, who's a retired HR executive director, also from Seminole County. He worked with Bill Vogel in Seminole County. So we have a superintendent perspective, I have the board perspective, John has the HR perspective, that's our team. And when we have multiple searches, each of us takes the lead on one. So we each take the lead in a different county, and then, but we all do, I hate to say everything, but we all do each of them. So the biggest thing that it will affect is the scheduling of meetings and interviews. I will tell you, next week on Tuesday, Charlotte and Brevard have already hired us, so we're already working in those 2 counties. Charlotte County is going to be looking at a tentative schedule. So they'll have theirs locked in.
Brevard has or hasn't yet?
Brevard has not. I'm meeting with them on Monday, and they're going to give us some dates to start working around. So we'll start building their schedule. So the sooner you can start building, the better. We have not, we're only doing 2 right now. I say only, but I mean, we're doing 2 right now. So you guys would be the 3rd if we worked with you. And I will say that,
You said Charlotte was the other one you're doing?
there was one district, and I can't quite recall who it was, but it was a larger district, and I said we just didn't have capacity, because I knew at that time, it was Broward. They just had a lot going on.
There's an exception for Broward. isn't
That
there?
would have tapped us out because of their high needs, because of their community. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I just knew we didn't have the capacity to do a Broward, but Osceola is different for us.
Right.
Other questions?
How many searches have you done before?
Oh, you know what? I should get my list. I've been the executive director at FSBA since 2015, and in that time, let me get my notes because I don't want to misspeak.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's at least 3 a year.
What did you say?
I wouldn't be surprised if it's at least 3 a year.
Well, some years we have 5, some years we have 1. It just depends on how things go. I don't want to say 20 and be wrong, but it could be as many as 20. But I want to give you the exact correct number. As long as I'm getting internet in here, that works. And let me go to.
Yeah, we can keep logging the Wi-Fi. I, for one, Madam Chair, I know FSBA reputation's been there forever. I mean, I wouldn't even entertain the question, to be honest with you. I know FSBA is the way to go. Because the questions are, how do we do it, not who do we do it with?
No, sure.
So I mean, to me, I'm fully sold on FSBA.
Okay. So, since 2016. 14. And one of the searches we did was not, the most recent searches, let me tell you those, Orange County and Pinellas County were the 2 most recent. Prior to that, we did the Lake Wells Charter School system, which, I don't know if you're familiar with Lake Wells Charter School system, but they actually have 6 schools in the city of Lake Wales, and it's a community charter system under the Polk County School Board. And they approached us because we had done the Polk superintendent search, and they liked what we did there, and so they said, hey, we'd like you to do our search, but for our purposes, Polk County Public Schools is our member. So we asked them, is it okay if for us to do the Lake Wales search? We wouldn't just do it without them because they're the authorizer. And they said, yes, we want a good, strong leader over there. So we did the charter school system. That was a really good collaborative community because it was small and they only had 6 schools. That was really good. And actually, they brought in somebody from Mississippi. And he's doing really well. In fact, they just won a state championship in football, and he was smiling. So.
Yeah. Frank, is this a public notice meeting? So I'm allowed to just go ahead and motion to contract with
You don't vote at these
FSBA?
meetings, you can take a consensus.
But we can't take a consensus. I will say this.
Because we're on a
for-
crunch timeline.
Yeah, we are on a crunch line, so I do want to call that out. But I will say for me, I'm on board with FSBA, but I don't want us to choose anyone that 5 of us are. I'm not looking for a consensus. I'm looking for unanimous vote because this is too important for us not to trust and be on board with the person or the team who's going to help us. So that's where I'm at. I'm good with FSBA. Obviously, I've seen the work through the years, but I'm looking for unanimous vote. Or not consensus. We all have to be on board.
Well, I appreciate that, and I agree with you. I tell boards all the time, in fact, you and I may have had that conversation. Oh, okay, because I tell boards all the time, listen, if working with FSBA for anyone's purpose is not your top, if you don't feel comfortable working with us, we would rather you work with somebody you're comfortable with. It is too important a decision to have any less than faith in the group that you work with, so.
Madam
Were you gonna
Chair,
say something?
if-
Well, I know we're not supposed to say, I'm not supposed to say anything, but Dana and I were probably
Well,
the
you've
only
done it
two here that
before.
were part of the last superintendent search that we did go through FSBA with. And I feel that they were very easy to work with. They're very organized. They answer your calls or your emails any time of the day or night. If you called and you needed something, you had it. They didn't have the answer, they got it. When we had to do the tours, like when Dana's team took them to different schools and stuff, it was all so very organized, and they were just so willing to compromise and work with whatever the staff here or the district needed. And it was just a very, I felt, pleasurable experience working with them. I felt very comfortable with them, and I feel like they were very much professional with how they handled it. But that's just my opinion.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair, I will just tell you, having done a ton of these and having done with districts that hired outside companies, the company, I don't care who you pick, but the companies don't do the level or have the level of sophistication of Florida
Yeah,
the way they do.
it's evident.
You talked about, we're going to counsel you this and had questions, et cetera. I saw a county pay $100,000. All they did was say, here are your candidates.
Oh, my God.
There was nothing like you had discussed today about different ways to approach different issues. I just sat there and went, this is incredible, and it was $100,000 out the door.
I agree. I've seen our school board work with outside companies and then our school board work with FSBA night and day. The professionalism, the communication, the assistance, the knowledge, by far FSBA has served us extremely well.
They have a vested interest, given who they are, in this board being successful in the search.
I don't have to be convinced. I just want to make sure that we're all on board because as.
Well, and it might
still
make
fun.
sense for me to maybe to leave. I mean, I'm not trying to be, I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable making a decision. So if that's important, I can,
Yeah, no, I
I mean, I
what do you
think,
think?
I think FSBA makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm always hesitant to pick the first person or just
Yeah.
one without speaking to others. I don't think that that's the right way to go for any public organization. If I had to pick one today, right now, without having had this meeting, I would have still picked the FSBA. Obviously, it clearly makes sense. You guys have the expertise and the experience. if you're gonna buy a Ford, you go to a Ford dealer, right? So, so it only makes sense. I mean, my only hesitation is just as a process.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm okay moving forward.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think
What
that.
about you guys?
Yep, I'm good.
I appreciate the presentation today,
Mhm.
explained through every piece of, I know it's a bird's eye view,
Yeah.
but just having that community input is so important for me, and I appreciate the different ways you're coming at it with that, so that's, yeah.
Madam Chair, with your permission,
Yes.
we'll have it on the next board. They can get going
Sure,
already.
yeah.
But we'll have it on the next board meeting for the board to vote.
Yeah, I think we have more than consensus. So,
So what I would recommend is you tell me when the next time we can come and get started and start talking about overlap and timeline and things like that.
Looks
When,
like-
do you have a workshop scheduled?
the next board meeting, I think we have the first workshop is at,
17th is the next board meeting. the next
2:30.
board is scheduled.
we have a 2:30 start of that day.
We have a 1:30,
1:30.
and that's for
1:30.
legislative priorities and internal audit.
Okay.
What day is that?
It's,
17th.
John, do you have a conflict that day? Can we?
The 17th at 1:30,
Yeah.
make it prior?
Yeah,
in the
I mean,
morning?
is that okay? Because I know you work.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So, we're just gonna hang out
Powwow
all
all
day
day on the
together, y'all. We're gonna
Let's
get
have
to know
lunch.
each
Let's put in the
other.
budget in there. Let's put in there.
I'll make it
Yeah, if we could, how long do you need, Andrea?
For that first meeting, it will be me, Bill, and John. They would all be here, and John would get his direction, like, okay, what are days we need to work around? What are board meeting days? What is your deadline? That kind of stuff.
If you could give us a list of all that.
Yeah.
Sooner
Yes.
than later, then they can be prepared at
Yeah,
the meeting.
absolutely.
Know exactly.
Yeah,
what-
I'll work through Tanya to get you that. I'll send you that pre-search agenda discussion outline that we discussed about where are you with your legislative delegation and the conversation with the board. So hour and a half is what we need.
Okay. So, whatever, we're just gonna be here all day, so.
What time would you,
10:30?
10,
10? Is that okay?
just in case.
10.
all right,
Which day?
The 17th of January?
the 17th at 10 a.m., correct? Okay, it's on my calendar, and I will
That will
inform,
be another workshop, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, Andrea, is that okay?
yeah, a workshop's fine. Yeah, 10 to 11:30, I've got it on my calendar. Perfect. And I will have, I mean no disrespect when I say this, but I will have the boys with me. So, because sometimes like Tanya will call and she'll say, "Could you do it?" Oh, you're going to have to ask the boys. I don't know that answer. You got to talk to the boys.
You were doing real well without them.
Well, you'd be surprised. I would not want to do this job without them. They are my wingmen, and they're the ones that build the relationships that your staff referenced.
Yeah.
That's because of Bill and John, not because of me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, so much.
See you soon, see you soon.
Yes.
And if you have any questions between now and then, let me know.
The shortest board meeting we ever had.
And Tanya, if
Let's do that again.
Happy New Year.
ask Tanya to send you. Okay.